Greetings and good Friday morning, this 26th of April 2024, third decade of the 21st century. If you're new to my channel, I always open with that because usually when I talk about, say, socio-political content, I always try to mention the fact that if you're not paying attention, we are indeed in the third decade of the 21st century. And I say that to sort of hyper-expose the fact that scholarly people had hypothesized where we would be as humans, perhaps as a country or as a species or as a planet, by the third decade of the 21st century. But instead we're talking about should biological males compete and all this other stuff. But the good news is today's conversation is not about that. This morning's conversation is actually the fifth time I've tried to record this video. I've even gone ahead and changed my background to the unit I was with at the time as it pertains to this conversation. I apologize, I'm too cheap to remove the watermark, and I'm also too cheap and too lazy to do any kind of fancy editing. So if this fifth edition does make it to YouTube and Rumble, then God bless. And why is it that? Because the content I have been trying to discuss, I've been trying to find the best way to approach this, and I've recorded at least 4 other videos, and I'm just not satisfied because for like the last 2.5, almost 3 weeks, there's been a subject that came up where there's an individual, and I don't remember the individual fondly. I don't have the best of memories of this individual, but that doesn't mean that this individual is not a good person. It doesn't mean that this individual is not a loving husband and father. All these things can be true, and it gets me into that loop, that circle of, you know, well, multiple things can be true at the same time. And eventually what had to happen is the subject matter itself essentially pertains to allegations against Jocko Willink and all of the SEALs under his command during a time when I myself was in Ramadi in 2006 with 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines, thus the background. And by sheer coincidence, I was exposed to this information from a buddy of mine I served with years prior in Hawaii. So let's say that you're new to my channel, you don't know me from Adam, and you're like, okay, what is this guy talking about? What's his experience? What's his background? I'll try to give you the 5-minute spiel. I'm originally from the southwest side of Chicago. Essentially, I'm poor white trash. I couldn't afford college, so I did like most people did, and I joined the military for the GI Bill. Just, you know, military provided a better life than I had, so I just stayed in, you know, eventually got married, had kids, you name it. After I would get through all of my schooling, I would wind up in 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, 3rd Marine Division, stationed out of Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. I would be with them for about 19 months to include 1 deployment to Okinawa. Then I would get cross-decked over to 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment, 3rd Marine Division, still based out of Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, and I would do about 2 deployments with them, one of which didn't really count, so you can only say 2. And I was with them for right at about 4 years before I took orders to the Mountain Warfare Training Center. While I was on my 10th day of leave, because you can take leave when you PCS from one duty station, 9/11 happened. And of course I felt guilty, like crap, my unit's on deployment, they're the tip of the spear, they're going to go on, they're going to go fight a war, and here I am going to a non-deployable command where I'm supposed to teach people how to survive in the mountains. Truthfully, I'd never been to the Mountain Warfare Training Center, so I had really no idea what I was getting into. But I check in, I go through and I get winter qualified, I get summer qualified. Because of our duty station, we also were exposed to teaching special operators to get ready to go to Afghanistan. So I'd worked with Green Berets, I'd worked with air controllers, I'd worked with Navy SEALs. Does that make me a Navy SEAL? No, because at no point in time have you ever heard me mention that I was recon, force recon. No. While I was in Bridgeport, I volunteered to be a part of the invasion of Iraq, where I participated in the invasion in 2003 with Gulf Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division. Retreat hell. That was an amazing experience. At that point in time, I'd been in for just over 8 years, So pardon the turn of phrase, pardon my language, but I'm essentially popping my combat cherry for the first time after having served 8 years in the military. So I've got kids that haven't even been in the Marine Corps a year, kids that have been in for a couple years, looking up to me as if, okay, is this normal? Is everything as expected? And I remember not wanting to disappoint the rank I wore. I remember whatever I had to do, I had to preserve the sanctity and the integrity of the rank I wore at that time, to include if that meant faking courage, if that meant faking it to make it, then I did what I had to do. And hopefully I did a good enough job. Hopefully my performance was believable and whatnot. I would eventually, after 6 months, go back to Bridgeport. I would finish my tour of duty and I would PCS to 3rd Battalion, 8th Marine Regiment, 2nd Marine Division, where we would deploy in 2005. We thought we were going directly into Fallujah. We did not. We went to Camp Fallujah, where one company went to Abu Ghraib for a short period of time. Another company would eventually go to OP Delta, where they stayed during the entire deployment and had one hell of an experience there. The other company, I'm not 100% sure what they did. I'd have to talk to my buddy to see if he can remember. I was with Weapons Company, so we were tasked with the responsibility of saturating the MSRs from one end of the territory to the other. So essentially, the Cloverleaf, the on-ramp and exit ramp to Michigan and Mobile, we were responsible for patrolling Route Mobile from that Cloverleaf all the way down to Abu Ghraib, and Route Michigan from the Cloverleaf all the way down to Abu Ghraib. And we had roughly 4 platoons doing 12-hour shifts between Michigan and Mobile. If you were on Route Michigan, you would also patrol areas like Chicago, Pittsburgh, Route Lincoln, I think even parts of Uranium. If for no other reason than at the request of the India Company commander, who was at OP Delta, we would sometimes go off Route Michigan and patrol through there. But we didn't have quite the same deployment as, say, Kilo did at Abu Ghraib, or as, say, India did at OP Delta, or Lima Company for that matter. In 2005, I would finally get promoted to Staff Sergeant after having been in for over 10 years. If you're uninitiated, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and possibly even the Space Force, they don't treat their... So when it comes to the enlisted ranks, you're not considered like a full-blown adult until you're an E7. In the Marine Corps, they consider you to be more of an adult at the rank of E6. Up to and including, we put even more precedence on the rank of E4 and E5. That's considered a non-commissioned officer. And we recognize this. We have uniform variations for it, the blood stripe. So obviously we're a bit different than the other branches of service. We're also smaller. So now I'm finally a staff non-commissioned officer as a staff sergeant. I finally got a place at the adult table, but it's the smaller adult table, and now we're deploying to Ramadi. FYI, Ramadi would end up being the deployment we were expecting in 05, but didn't get. But that's a whole other story. Trust me when I say there's a whole lot of information I could discuss about Ramadi, which means I remember it quite vividly. And this will all make sense here in a moment. After that deployment, we would come back and get ready for the MEU. Due to my firstborn son having medical issues, I would subsequently I would do the entire workup for the MEU, but I would not deploy with 3-8 as part of the 22nd MEU. I would be part of the RBE. Due to my son's condition degrading, he would eventually get transferred to Cincinnati Children's, where he would receive 2 transplant operations, and I would report to Inspector Instructor Staff, Columbus, Ohio, with Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines. While I was with them, the battalion got orders to mobilize and activate, and I would deploy with them to Afghanistan in 2010 to 11. After that tour of duty, barring some other details that don't pertain to this particular video, I would PCS for the last time back to Lejeune, where I would check into 3rd Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment, 2nd Marine Division, and I was immediately put on an advisor team where I would subsequently deploy yet again to Sangin, not to include a small stint in Musa Kala, Afghanistan. After that deployment, it wasn't long before I got sent down to 6th Marine Regimental Headquarters, where I would work out of the S3, also known as the Operations Section, and would subsequently retire after 20 years of service. Some additional information you should know. First and foremost, the subject we're getting ready to talk about here shortly, as it pertains to Jocko Willink, was referred to me by a buddy of mine who more than likely had no idea the 6 degrees of separation. But the video he posted on Facebook suggested that Jocko and his SEAL platoon, SEAL team, were not as honorable as they said they were. And there was a letter or a response or something written by an executive officer of a Marine unit who, as it turns out, would be my executive officer for the company that I was assigned to in 2006 while deployed to Ramadi. When I tell you multiple things can be true, I mean it. At that point in time, during our deployments, we would deploy for 7 months, we would come back for 7 months. Trust me when I tell you, as a conventional force, 7 months is not a lot of time to put together a platoon of new people, already existing people, new leadership. It's just not enough time. You don't have enough time to establish SOPs, etc. Part of your coup de grace, your culminating event, would be to go to 29 Palms for 1 month, where you would try to establish who you are as a platoon, as a company, as a battalion. Again, it's not enough time, but it's all we had, and that's what Marines do. We improvise, we adapt, we overcome, and we're successful. Essentially, that gives you the deployment to try to work on stuff. At that point in time, we were not operating as 1st, 2nd, 3rd Platoon, Weapons Platoon. We were operating more as 1st, 2nd, 3rd Platoon, 4th Platoon, where 4th Platoon was basically what was left of Weapons Platoon. And then some of the weapons guys were spread out a little bit throughout the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Platoon. And then you had the Headquarters Platoon. If we didn't see it by that time, when we finally got to 29 Palms for our 1 month, things were shaky. Things were not going as some of us were used to. Things were not progressing the way that they should. Our company was looking rough at best. And I'm sparing a lot of the details. I'm not airing all the dirty laundry. I could probably do that in a separate video, but the whole reason for my channel is my own personal catharsis. And one of the things I've learned in my own self journey is anybody can talk poorly about somebody else. Anybody can sit there on their pedestal, lift themselves up, and talk down about other people without knowing the full context of what that person may have been going through at that point in time, without knowing the demons that person may have been battling, without knowing anything else. And sometimes it just is what it is. Sometimes your observations don't require any context. It just is what it is. You're spot on. Things would eventually culminate in what I would best say is a shit show during our final exercise in 29 Palms, and it essentially fractured the company that was already on shaky ground. I mean, we're trying like hell. The staff and officers are trying like hell to hold things together in spite of other people's shortcomings, and there was an opportunity to squash something. It didn't get squashed. It was allowed to flourish, and it fractured an already fragile company into essentially a group of personalities, and it would eventually turn the entire deployment into a game of personality politics. And I can tell you, you know, Jocko talks about extreme leadership and extreme ownership. I can tell you, I was not overly familiar with the game. I did not play the game well. I more than likely made several, I know I made some mistakes, but I probably made some that I can't even identify. and I probably did not come out on the positive end of the personality politics. I will tell you, as far as contextually speaking, as a staff non-commissioned officer, part of your job is to enforce things that the troops don't always like. I'll just leave it at that, because otherwise it starts to degrade into more of a personal thing and less about what I want this video to be about, because I'm building to it. I apologize for the long walk, but hopefully the drink will be worth it. So one of the issues we had was our executive officer. I don't know what he was going through. I don't know what was going on at the time, but I know from my perspective, from where I sat, and to include my platoon commander, who we didn't always get along. We didn't always see eye to eye. We had differences between the two of us, but the one thing we did agree on was that our executive officer was not doing his utmost. And here's what you need to know. I apologize if I'm letting a secret out of the bag, but unless there's more options, and there very well could be, the executive officer position is essentially for one of two reasons. You were deemed not that good as a platoon commander, perhaps not that good as a Marine infantry officer, so they're trying to hide you as an executive officer under the leadership of a strong company commander. Or you were solid, people are looking out for you, they want your career to progress, so they give you the executive officer position as a rite of passage, as a check in the box, so that as you're being looked at for promotions, as you're being looked at for different billets, they can look at your career and it's like, okay, you did your platoon time, you did your executive officer time, you're checking all the boxes. Obviously, as an alpha male, you want that second platoon. You want to go from a rifle platoon commander to like a weapons platoon commander. But not everybody can get that. And there's only so many positions in a battalion. One could argue that our executive officer was found wanting during his first deployment as a rifle platoon commander, and they were attempting to hide him as an executive officer. Again, trust me when I tell you, I'm not the biggest fan of trying to sling mud. I'm not the biggest fan of just trying to arbitrarily talk poorly, but my recollection of our deployment within that company, within that battalion, our executive officer did not necessarily live up to all the things that he was supposed to do. If you need a greater example, he was deployed on Advon with the company gunnery sergeant for a month before the main body got there. We never heard from them. For 4 weeks, we never heard from them. We get there, and quite frankly, it's like, surprise! Brand new information that required us to readjust the company. And when I mean readjust, I mean like we had to move people around. So the platoon that you were trying to build cohesion with all through 29 Palms is now not going to be the same platoon because you have to move people around. The bottom line is we fell in on like over 30 vehicles. We were now going to be a vehicle intensive company. And from my experience with weapons company, I had to alert the first sergeant and the CO and the company gunny and the XO. I was like, hey, before we get too excited, the battalion commander has a pretty strict policy on who can drive the vehicles. Basically, no less than an incidental Humvee operator's license, preferably a Humvee operator's license, which required all the platoon sergeants to go through and find out who was a qualified Humvee operator, who had an incidental driver's license, because not anybody could get behind the wheel of a vehicle. We're already trying to put together the pieces after the shit show that was 29 Palms. This doesn't make anything any better. And we could have known about this for 4 weeks prior, back in the States, prior to getting there. And then throughout the remainder of the deployment, I don't remember having the most positive relationship with the guy or thinking that highly of him. Does that mean he's a bad person? Does that mean he's not a capable employee where he's working now? Does that not mean he's not a capable husband or a father? No. But it could highlight the fact that as a Marine combat infantry officer, perhaps maybe it was above his skill set. It doesn't make him bad. It just means, you know, he tried something. You know, he gave it his best. It wasn't within his skill set, and he probably did the right thing, and he moved on. I think that's fine. He still tried to serve with honor. I don't think he did anything dishonorable. But then there's this. Then he pens this letter, or he writes this response on a podcast. And I don't know chicken or the egg. I don't know which came first, but I also know that there's a senior chief, retired Navy SEAL, who's also speaking out against Jocko and his SEALs and whatnot. And for my piece, that's not an area I want to spend time with, because I'm not a Navy SEAL. I was not a special operator. That's not an area that I feel I can offer any legitimate critique of. Because it is YouTube and people always want to hear stuff, I'll provide my 2 cents at the end of this video, but I'm going to try to wrap things up in the next 9 minutes. I'm halfway through Jocko's podcast, episode 434, and he's talking about Ramadi. And so far, everything he's talking about is spot the fuck on. Pardon my language, but I'm with him. Everything's jiving, everything from my memory. And when I tell you, I have vivid memories. I also kept combat journals. If you want to, oh, what a fag, whatever. I kept journals of all of my combat deployments for various reasons. So far, everything Jocko's talking about is spot on. I did, however, listen to his addendum, episode 434.5. Everything there I can validate when it pertains to 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. Everything there is spot on. I don't want to be the guy that says, no, you're a fucking liar, no this, you know, sling mud, throw dirt, etc. That's not the type of person I want to be at 48 years of age. But sometimes it just is what it is. You can try to look at all angles, you can try to look at every potential perspective, be as objectionable and rational as possible, and sometimes it just is what it is. The executive officer said that we suffered 36 KIA. He didn't specify a timeline, but he was attributing the 36 KIA directly to the actions of Jocko's SEAL platoon or SEAL team, and he references the SEALs, and he references retribution and all of this. I can't validate anything in his letter. As a man, as a husband, as a father, as somebody who prides themselves on their integrity, I'm just being honest. I can't validate anything he said. Could multiple things be true? Absolutely. Let me give you some ideas. Is it possible that in his rank as an officer, in his position as an executive officer, he was exposed to information that was deemed unshareable with the enlisted? Sure. Was he exposed to information that was deemed unnecessary for people below his position to know? Sure. Was his position above mine? Absolutely. As an officer, his position's automatically above mine. Is it possible that due to the personality politics at the time, I was also deemed unnecessary of knowing this information? Sure. Is it possible I could have forgotten? Yes. Can you put all three together and all three be true? Yes. But from where I sit, from my vivid recollections, when I hear Jocko speak in episode 434.5, I'm with him every step of the way. I'm part of the way through, I'm maybe 1/3 of the way through episode 434, and I'm still with him. I'm still with him every step of the way. I can't validate what this executive officer says, and he was my company level executive officer, and I can't validate what he says. Jocko said we lost 17 Marines, well 16 Marines and 1 sailor. He's absolutely right. I can validate that 100%. You can even go to the 3.8 page. We lost 16 Marines and 1 sailor during that entire deployment. Now, have 19 other Marines and sailors succumbed to their demons or succumbed to their wounds since that deployment? I don't know. I would have to go through the Facebook page, 3.8 alumni, and find out how many of our Marines and sailors from that deployment either took their lives or lost their lives as a result of complications. But during that actual deployment, 17, we lost 17 Marines and sailors, 16 Marines and 1 sailor. The Marine that the XO references as like some sort of retribution for what the SEALs did, that was rather late in our deployment. Like, we were dangerously close to having 1-6 come in to start doing the left seat, right seat with us when that Marine was shot. And I don't recall any of it having anything to do with retribution. What I remember is this: if we made the active decision to go out during the daytime in specific areas north of Route Michigan in our area of operation, to include after morning prayer, we knew for a fact we were looking for a fight. If you were operating outside the wire during daylight hours after morning prayer, you knew 100% you were specifically looking for a fight. We knew that. And Jocko, in his own way, talks about that as well. All of which spot on. The Marine who was sniped was shot right below the cover in the area we call the T-box. He was sniped. It was an extremely accurate shot and he dropped. And losing him sucked. He was the only KIA we suffered as a company. Did we suffer casualties and have to medevac Marines? Yes. He was the only KIA we suffered. And he was a good dude, and he was a good Marine, and more than likely was a great son, could have been a phenomenal husband and father. He was not given that opportunity. Perhaps the deadly sniper of Ramadi got to him. The only the only solace I have is it was such a clean and well-placed shot that he didn't feel anything. It was like flipping a switch. I don't like talking about that because I almost feel like I'm giving props to the sniper, but I digress. For the most part, without hearing all of episode 434, having listened to all of episode 434.5, I can validate what Jocko says so far. As far as what the XO says, I can't validate anything. I know numerically his numbers are off. I don't recall being given any reports whatsoever of the Navy SEALs doing anything inappropriate. I do remember Navy SEALs working in our area. I remember coordinating with them, not one-on-one, but I remember them. Hell, I remember being the watch officer, receiving radio checks from them, letting us know where they were at in order to deconflict blue on blue, just like Jocko talks about. I don't remember them being cowboys. As far as that goes, the cowboy logo comes a lot from appearances. Conventional warfighters do not have the luxury of cuffing their sleeves, unblousing their boots, growing beards, wearing non-uniformed clothing. If that means you're a cowboy, then so be it. And if that means Jocko's SEALs were guilty of being cowboys, then whatever. I do remember them working with us, sharing in. I don't remember having the relationship that the executive officer talks about. I just don't. I don't remember a lot of what Jocko talks about with the insurgents and with Al Qaeda in Iraq. And I don't know if he'll talk about it because I'm only maybe a third of the way through. But by the time 1st Battalion 6 Marines took over from us, somewhere midway through their deployment, the Great Awakening happened, and eventually all of these leaders of the insurgents kind of got together and were like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And they basically came out of the woodwork and said, hey, you hate Al Qaeda, we hate Al Qaeda, how can we be friends? And some of the stories I've heard about their quote-unquote EOD techs removing the IEDs that they placed themselves was kind of like shocking, like that's been there the whole time. But I digress. I don't know Jocko. I don't owe the man anything. He doesn't owe me anything. We've never met. I didn't have such a bad relationship with the XO that I needed to do this. But truth is truth. Now, whatever Jocko and this other Navy SEAL are dealing with, whether that's personality politics, whether that's anything else, that's between them. I got nothing to do with that. I don't have anything to offer that, because that's just not my territory. As somebody who was there, as somebody who participated and shared the battle space, I don't remember anything of what the XO was talking about. Is it possible that he had different experiences than me? 100%, 100%. I mean, I know for a fact he had different experiences than me, but that doesn't... My point being is it possible he tried to interact with a Navy SEAL lieutenant and it went south? Is it possible that the way he conducted himself had a lot to do with that? Sure. So many things could be true that I'm not privy to. But for my recollection, I don't remember things going down the way that the executive officer discussed. His motivations for chiming in, his motivations for getting involved, I don't know. I don't know. I have not been in touch with the man since he left the company, since he left the battalion, he left the Marine Corps. I don't have any ill will towards him. You know, he did his thing. He served his country. He was from where I stood, he was not known for being a long ball hitter. He was not known for doing his job to the level of expectation that was expected. Doesn't make him a bad person, doesn't make him a bad American. Why he chose to get involved in this particular conversation and talk about the Navy SEAL, I don't know. As far as this other stuff goes, my 2 cents is this. If Jocko had the foresight to recognize that at some point in time his military career would have to come to an end and he would have to find some way to sustain himself, some way to provide for his family, and he saw an opportunity to start creating a brand and branding himself and being an entrepreneur and being a self-made man, and, you know, perhaps capitalizing on his background as a Navy SEAL and trying to help other Navy SEALs, perhaps from his unit, you know, like brothers in arms do. Okay, if that has anything to do with going against the ethos of the SEAL community, that's between them and the SEAL community. That's not my community. There's no chance in hell Jocko will probably ever see this. I'm not popular. I don't do this for monetization. I don't do this for clicks. I don't give a shit if you hit like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. Selfishly speaking, I do this for my own therapy. And if anybody wants to get involved in the conversation, I'm always appreciative. I'm always willing to read, react, and respond to your comments out loud on my channel. I'm not big, I'm not sponsored, so therefore, if you do leave a comment, I will probably read, react, and respond to it. Beyond that, like I said before, I don't owe Mr. Willink anything. He doesn't owe me anything. I don't recall meeting any of his SEALs directly. He references Joseph Thompson. I remember Joseph Thompson. I ended up in Lima Company after the Ramadi deployment and would have deployed with them on the Mew. It just didn't work out due to my son's health. You know, Jocko had nothing but good things to say about 3-8, and I don't remember having anything negative to say about the SEALs from my interactions. The only negative thing I would have to say, and I really feel bad about saying this, aside from the internal personality politics that we were dealing with that made that deployment unnecessarily rough, I remember the Army unit and all of their tanks and their Bradleys that operated out of Camp Corregidor. They would always have to travel down Route Michigan, and there was this one area in between the government center and OP Haria, I think between the Gay Palace and some other multi-story building. It was a perfect blind spot for the insurgents to emplace IEDs or to push IEDs on a pole where neither us at Haria or the Gov Center could accurately engage the individual. And from what I recall, the ROEs that were in place for us, we were not allowed to engage the IED. So we would have to note it and call out EOD, which EOD had a standard procedure of sweeping the area at night. And if the Army just happened to roll through, and I want to say their call sign was Red Curry X-Ray, we would always reach out to them and let them know, hey, at this location there's a suspected IED, just be careful. Hey, thanks for the heads up. They'd get there, the IED would explode, and then they would basically point every weapon system outboard and start shooting. As in, they would start shooting us at OP Haria, and they would start shooting the other Marines at the government center. Beyond that, I could probably go on and on and on about Ramadi, but it's already been 35 minutes and I need to shut the fuck up. So that's my piece. If you leave a comment, I'll read and respond to it out loud. Otherwise, be safe, everybody. Until next time, you're awesome.